A young man lives like a god for a year, only to be brutally sacrificed in front of the entire city. In ancient India, a king's white horse goes on an epic journey wandering the land for a year, before being killed alongside hundreds of other animals. And Romans partied all night during a festival, drinking, dancing, and plotting in secret until the Senate stepped in and put an end to the chaos. These are disturbing ancient festivals that were banned forever. The festival of Tōxcatl was one of the big annual Aztec celebrations dedicated to the god Tezcatlipoca. It took place in May, and the entire thing revolved around a young man who'd been chosen the year before to impersonate the god. Usually he was a war captive, but once he was picked, his life totally changed. He was dressed in fancy embroidered clothes and jewelry. He walked through the city playing a flute, smoking tobacco, smelling flowers. Everyone treated him like the living image of Tezcatlipoca. For an entire year, he lived like this, and to top it all off, he married 4 women representing goddesses right before the festival began. But there was a trade-off, a pretty major catch. At the end of this year, during the actual Tōxcatl ceremony, he walked up the temple steps and was sacrificed. In pretty brutal fashion too. This was not just a quick thing they wanted to get out of the way, it was the main attraction. His chest would be opened up, heart ripped out, head lobbed off, and the 4 brides were sacrificed as well. Afterward, a new man would be chosen to take on the role until the next festival. This one is really interesting. It's from ancient India, the Ashvamedha, or horse sacrifice. It's way cooler than it sounds. Only a powerful and victorious king could even attempt it. The whole purpose was to show off dominance and expand control over the land. All started with a very specific horse, a white stallion with black spots. After a round of ceremonies, the horse was set loose to wander for a year. Wherever it went, the king was basically claiming that territory. If another ruler didn't like it, they could challenge the king's men who guarded the horse, which often meant war. When the horse finally came back, the rituals continued, culminating in the horse being decorated, tethered, and finally suffocated. Hundreds of other animals were also killed alongside it, and the king's chief queen had to lie beside the dead horse under a blanket. The next day, the priests continued the rituals, carefully cutting up the horse and performing ceremonies over its remains. Fire played a big role in all of this, and the offerings from the horse and other animals were carried out exactly as the priests instructed. Everyone involved took part in cleansing baths afterward. By the end, the king had pulled off this massive, intense show of power that left no question about who was in charge. Next up is Bacchanalia, a Roman festival that would have been a pretty wild party. Originally, it was a celebration of the god of wine, freedom, and just letting loose. At first, it was mostly women celebrating during the day, but later versions went all night with loud music, lots of drinking, and men and women from all social classes partying together. It got wild enough that some people were worried the celebrations were getting out of hand. The historian Livy, writing a couple hundred years later, said the festival got seriously out of hand. He claimed that under the cover of all the intoxication and dancing, some leaders used the gatherings to manipulate people, convince them to commit crimes, and plot killings without anyone noticing. The idea was that with everyone caught up in the excitement, the cult could secretly influence people and control events in the city. Now, Livy's interpretation might be a little exaggerated, but it shows how shocking and scary these parties were to the Roman authorities. Next up, we have Viking Yule, which on the surface sounds pretty festive. They'd feast, drink, burn the Yule log, decorate a tree, basically early Christmas vibes, but Yule had a dark side. Every 9th year, over the course of 9 days, the king would sacrifice a total of 81 people, 9 each day. Their heads were offered to the gods as part of the rituals. It's kind of crazy to think about, because while we usually picture feasting and merrymaking, human sacrifice was right there alongside it. It wasn't unique to the Vikings, to be fair. Tons of ancient cultures practiced it, but the timing makes it especially shocking. Imagine ringing in the holiday season with booze, roasted meat, tree decorating, and ritual killings. Next up is one of the most disturbing practices from ancient India, Sati. This was when a widow would sit on her husband's funeral pyre as it was set on fire. Of course, dying in the process. The idea was that by doing this, she was showing ultimate loyalty and devotion to her husband, even in death. In some texts and stories, women who performed Sati were portrayed as perfect examples of purity and devotion, but the reality was a lot more complicated. Not every part of India accepted this. There were plenty of people that spoke out against the practice. On top of that, it wasn't always choice. Many widows were forced into it. Sati became most well known during the medieval period, but it didn't completely disappear with ancient India. There were instances of it happening well into the 1800s, but it was officially outlawed in 1827. Thargelia was one of ancient Athens' main festivals for Apollo and Artemis. It was all about giving thanks for the harvest. On the first day, they offered the first fruits of their crops and performed a purifying ceremony to make sure the gods didn't wreck the harvest with heat or disease. And this all sounds pretty standard so far, but it gets really ugly. The Athenians would pick the ugliest people they could find and then parade them around with figs around their necks, whipping them. Some accounts say they were stoned to death and their ashes were scattered to fertilize the land. Other times they might have been beaten but not killed, or just cast out of the city as a scapegoat. It seems like whether they actually died depended on the situation. Like if the person had committed a serious crime, or the city just really needed someone to blame for all their bad luck. The second day of Thargelia was a lot more cheerful. Everyone celebrated with a procession carrying fruits, kids put olive branches on doors to protect the crops, and there were singing contests. Adopted children were also officially welcomed into their new families as well. So man, the whole parading an ugly person around and possibly beating them to death really casts a dark shadow over what's otherwise a pretty pleasant sounding time. Next up, we've got Lykaia, a nutty festival from ancient Greece that took place on the slopes of Mount Lycaon in Arcadia. To be honest though, nobody outside of Arcadia really knew what went on. Most of what we know comes from rumors, stories told by other Greeks, but they are intense. The festival's origin is already pretty dark. It's about King Lycaon, who tried to test Zeus by serving him his own son's flesh. Zeus, obviously not fooled, turned the guy into a wolf and brought the boy back to life. Plato tells us that every 9 years the Arcadians would gather on the mountain and perform a human sacrifice alongside animal sacrifices. The entrails would then be mixed together so that nobody could tell what was human and what was animal, and then everyone ate it. Anyone who ended up eating the human part supposedly turned into a wolf for 9 years. If they survived without eating any more human flesh, they could turn back into a human, but if they slipped up, they were stuck as a wolf forever. This one is really bizarre. Lupercalia, an ancient Roman festival that was held every February 15th, run by a group of priests called the Luperci. The festival started with a sacrifice of goats and a dog. 2 young priests were brought to the altar, had their foreheads touched with blood, and then wiped it off with milk-soaked wool, all while laughing, which was actually part of the ritual. Afterward, they had a big feast. Then the priests would cut strips from the goat's skins and run around playfully whipping any woman they ran into. Getting struck by the strips was supposed to make a woman more fertile. Lupercalia carried on for hundreds of years, but in 494 CE, the Pope banned it. The church probably wanted to swap it out for Christian celebrations like Candlemas on February 2nd, possibly St. Valentine's Day, though that came later. Next up, we've got the Argei, one of the strangest and most mysterious Roman rituals. It happened twice a year, once in March, again in May, but by the time of Augustus, nobody really remembered what it was all about. The ceremony involved a long procession of priests, virgins, and officials visiting 27 little shrines around the city. At each station, they collected a figure made of straw, reed, and rush, shaped like a tied-up human. Once they visited all the shrines, the whole group marched to the oldest bridge in Rome and tossed the straw figures into the river. The idea was to purify the city, though no one was totally sure why it started. Ancient writers like Ovid claimed it was connected to Saturn and may have originally involved human sacrifice, but the story goes that Hercules ended that practice before Rome even really existed. And finally, we have the Celtic festival that gave us Halloween, Samhain. Halloween is my absolute favorite time of year, but if Samhain was still celebrated the way it used to be, I'd be locking myself indoors all October. Times were scary back in the day, but you could count on Samhain to be the most disturbing night of the year. The Celts believed that Samhain was when the veil between the living and the dead disappeared. For one night, spirits of the dead along with fairies and demons would walk among the living. To deal with that, people would light candles inside their homes to guide spirits back to the other side. They placed them in carved out gourds, later pumpkins, filling them with fat from earlier sacrifices and lighting them up to scare away whatever might come knocking. Oh yeah, sacrifices. Samhain also involved sacrifices, both animals and, according to some accounts, humans, just to keep the gods of death satisfied. So yeah, the jack-o'-lanterns, the spooky theme, I'm glad all that wasn't banned. The human sacrificing, I think we can all do without. Been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.